Howdy YouTube, Active Asshole on Roids here with another nuclear-powered rant. That's Active Asshole on Roids, kryptonite for conservatives. I'm off my rocker, out of work today, and got the day off from work, and on the warpath. So here we go. Today I'm going to be taking aim at the non-aggression principle touted by libertarians every time you corner them, and every time you rightfully peg them as being sociopaths. You know that you probably, if you're a liberal or a progressive or a socialist like me, or if you're a centrist or even a conservative, and you've had Brazil nuts, these things get stuck in my teeth easily. You've probably had some right-wing libertarian, or it could be a left-wing libertarian, though I think any libertarian who claims that they're on the left, I don't see the attraction. But okay, you probably had them throw this thing called the non-aggression principle or non-coercion principle, however the fuck they want to. However they want to call it, up in your face at some point. And that's the thing about the, I'm just here to take aim at this, because I'm getting tired of a bunch of fucking sociopaths, libertarians. We used to call them sociopaths back in the old days. Now we just call them libertarians. We got to be nice about it. We got to be politically correct about calling people something nowadays, because even the sociopaths want you to call them something different. All right, and I decided, this is my opinion on what libertarianism is. This is from the way I see it, of course. This is my opinion on the non-aggression principle that libertarians tout. I see it as an ideological abstract construct created by libertarians for libertarians that does two things. One, it supposedly creates a moral justification for libertarianism that, that normally would not exist in any given shape, form, or fashion, because there really is no moral justification for this kind of a belief system. But libertarians like Murray Rothbard had to pull this one, and Rockwell, they had to pull this out of their ass. They had to create one out of thin air. And ever since then, every single libertarian and Randian bastard out there has tried to hold up the NAP as some kind of a fucking a safety blanket, security blanket, or something to say, evil government, evil democratic consensus. You can't tell me what to do. I'm above your rules. I mean, libertarianism, they cannot have, and never did have, a moral justification. And because the non-aggression principle was developed by libertarians to dovetail so perfectly with their absolute fealty to property rights at the expense of first and second generation human rights, the NAP, the non-aggression principle just happens to be a double win for them. As an ideological construct created by libertarians for libertarianism to justify libertarianism, okay, the non-aggression principle allows libertarians to believe that they can live by their own rules in spite of such things as human rights, democratic consensus, or the rule of law, while allowing libertarians to believe that it is in fact themselves who are being persecuted for not being allowed by the general public to be sociopaths, to have their own rules to live by. This libertarian ideological construct, the non-aggression principle, or non-coercion principle, anti-coercion principle, whatever, is wholly incompatible with both a democratic system of government and the very idea of a positive state working with the democratic consensus of the people. True freedom always comes with restraints. Without such restraints in the form of the rule of law and a real effort on the part of society to give equal weight to both positive and negative rights, true freedom for all people everywhere would be at risk. Maybe not immediately, but at some point down the road it would be. Private power concentrated into the hands of a chosen few, or just a natural few that arise organically as a result of the lack of restrictions, has been and always will be one of the greatest threats to democracy. As Isaiah Berlin once said, now Isaiah Berlin was a socialist from Germany who was very active back in the 1920s and 30s. Death, freedom for the pike is death for the middle. And if finance is kept out of reach from the democratic consensus, the only tangible solution open to the public in combating private power, that is concentrated wealth in the hands of a few, is also taken off the table by default. The thing is, the average citizen doesn't have time to do research on anything really, on any of the harm caused by a product, the problems created by a problem, the product, or something used in the product, or whatever. They don't have the time to do this kind of stuff. That's why you have government agencies that test these things, that vet these products before they get out on the open market. This is why you have regulations in the first place. On another note, I've always found it fascinating that the majority of libertarians who brandish their ideological abstraction as a part of their reactionary anti-government message display an astonishing blind spot with regards to how the non-aggression principle would play itself out in the absence of the very social contract they detest so much. If the state of nature before the rise of human civilization was so brutish and so driven by the rule of force, which predates both the divine right of kings notion of government and the social contract notion of the relationship between man and state, how can libertarians expect their ideological abstraction to do much of anything in the face of the ancient rule of force that would exist in a state of nature, or would eventually arise in a state of nature? This brings me to ask the question that's just as important. Could it be that maybe, just maybe, that libertarians aren't being completely honest with non-libertarians regarding the workability of their non-aggression principle? I've often said that the only reason libertarians want the current system out of the way is because they have this misguided idea that somehow under a different system, in the absence of the social contract, that they would wind up the winners. They have this misguided idea that they're special. But again, I'll say it now just like I said it in my earlier video. If they were failures under the current system, and they can use the government as a convenient excuse for why they're failures all they want to. If they're failures under the current system, what makes them think that they'll succeed under the new system? Most of them don't even get out from in front of the internet. Most of them spend almost all their time on the internet, or or doing something else online, or something like that. I mean, I could hardly imagine a libertarian text chat, keyboard warrior, forum warrior actually going out in the event that all that civilized society, that civil society broke down, in which all of these venues that we have under the public sector, under our commonwealth as a nation, such as running water, clean running water, waste disposal, I could hardly see them doing very well in a state of nature. I just don't see it. There are too many of these libertarians who are, for the most part, just a bunch of obese, a bunch of morbidly obese, out of shape, well, I guess I can use the term pussy to describe many of them, who, for the most part, cry when they don't get what they want from daddy. I mean, they spent most of their time growing up in a suburban area, some gated community somewhere. Being spoiled by their parents, many of them being upper middle class, and pretty much getting whatever they wanted, and then they go to college and out of daddy's money, assuming they're not either upper middle class or wealthy, they go to college out of daddy's money, and they've had most of everything handed to them their whole lives, but they still think they're the shit. You can't get through to people like that. I mean, this isn't saying that libertarians are wholly misguided in their fear of the state. The state has the potential to be used in such a way that it can threaten human rights, just as is the case with concentrated wealth and organized religion. However, what libertarians portray is something twisted that goes far beyond a healthy distrust of the state. Unless you're a major shareholder, you can't influence a corporation with your vote. In the industrialized world, you can at least influence the state with your vote. Libertarians try so hard to be the exact opposite of Bolsheviks, of the very Bolsheviks and communists that they despise, that they become just as great a threat to first and second generation human rights for opposite reasons. The government has to be the single most powerful sovereign entity in the land to enforce the laws. It has to have the sovereign ability to use force to make laws and to uphold the rule of law. And no amount of trying to paint yourselves as being above the rest of us, as being beyond, beyond the universally recognized notion of human rights. This brings me to another point. Libertarians. We had 2 world wars, colonialism, a Great Depression, and a Cold War that arose from problems that were not solved, that were left over from both the Industrial Revolution and the end from problems created by imperialism and capitalism. Yes, capitalism. Something that they're too intellectually disingenuous to just fess up to. But from all of these problems, after all the guns had been fired, after all the deaths, genocides, totalitarian states from the first half of the 20th century, after all of the bloodlust and after all the hatreds and fervors and religious fanaticism, after centuries of feudal landlords and robber barons and sophics, using the power of democracy against itself from within. After the Second World War, we actually started moving toward recognizing first and second generation human rights. And we started to actually work toward giving both positive and negative rights. Or, as libertarians like to say, both negative and positive freedoms. Either one. Equal weight. Because we understood from seeing all of these problems, from seeing all the problems caused by holding property rights up on a pedestal at the expense of all other rights, we started working toward giving equal weight to both the values of equality and justice, both social and economic. And for libertarians to come along after the entire world has wrestled with this idea and has developed a coherent, tangible idea of what constitutes human universal rights, for them to come along and portray themselves as the ultimate arbiters of what's considered a right, in their case property rights, for them to tell us all that we got away from history, that we got off on the wrong track after all that we've been through to come to this point. After all the real-world collective experience that humankind has developed that allowed us to become organized and engaged as a citizenry, as public citizens, to press these rights through the democratic system, through the positive state. For them to come along and tell us to go back to the very systems that failed us so miserably. Because remember, the Founding Fathers tried it the libertarian way through the Articles of Confederation, and it failed miserably. The country nearly collapsed. Damn flies. From economic distracting. From the inability to raise funds, and that's why they gave government the powers that it has in the current Constitution. It reeks of the worst kind of hubris, the worst kind of arrogance one can have to claim that your movement, which is just a fringe group in one country, a fringe group in one country that is largely based upon the belief system of a bunch of other crazy nuts who came out of the Second World War and took the exact opposite lessons from the war that over 90% of America took. I don't know what to say to that kind of egotism, just outright naive egotism, just distilled human id given voice. I don't know what to say to it. And I guess I've rattled on long enough, but this is Active Asshole on Roids. Peace out, everybody.